the world held its breath. In an era where every action is scrutinized and every reaction is magnified, the stakes had never been higher. People from all corners of the globe, regardless of their political affiliations or beliefs, found themselves united in a shared sense of dread and anticipation. On October 25, 2024, a line was crossed. This date would be etched into the annals of history, not just as a moment in time, but as a turning point that would shape the future of international relations and global peace. Israeli jets tore through the night sky, their payloads destined for the heart of Iran. The roar of the engines and the precision of their flight were a testament to the meticulous planning and the gravity of the mission at hand. The attack, a response to an earlier Iranian missile strike, marked a terrifying escalation. It was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of peace and the ease with which it can be shattered. Gone was any pretense of a cold peace. Diplomatic channels that once buzzed with cautious optimism now fell silent, replaced by the ominous drumbeats of war. In its place, the smoldering embers of open conflict. The landscape, once a testament to human achievement and resilience, now lay in ruins, a stark symbol of the destructive power of war. This was not a surgical strike. The devastation was widespread, affecting not just military targets but also the surrounding areas, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. This was an act of war, the kind of war that leaves scars not just on the land, but on the hearts and minds of those who witness it. Israeli warplanes targeted not just Iranian missile facilities, but the very nerve centers of Iran's military apparatus. The precision and intensity of the strikes were designed to cripple Iran's ability to retaliate. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, long a thorn in the side of Israel and its allies, found its bases engulfed in flames. The message was clear. Israel would no longer stand idly by in the face of aggression. The message was unmistakable. Israel would no longer tolerate Iranian aggression. Political leaders around the world scrambled to respond, their speeches filled with calls for restraint and peace, even as the reality on the ground told a different story. The world watched in horror as images of the strikes flashed across television screens. The immediacy of modern media brought the conflict into living rooms and public squares, making it impossible to ignore. Smoke billowed from the wreckage of what were once symbols of Iranian military might. The destruction was not just physical, but symbolic, a blow to the very heart of Iran's military pride. The initial shock gave way to a chilling realization. The Middle East, a region perpetually teetering on the brink, had taken a giant leap towards the abyss. The delicate balance of power had been disrupted, and the consequences were unpredictable. But amid the chaos and destruction, a single question resonated: how would Iran respond? The world braced itself for the next move, knowing that the response could either escalate the conflict further or open a path to de-escalation. The world waited with bated breath, knowing that the answer held the fate of millions in the balance. The tension was palpable, a reminder of the fragile nature of peace and the ever-present threat of war. Iran burned. The flames consumed not just buildings and infrastructure but also the very spirit of a nation. The devastation was a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in a region perpetually on the brink of conflict. Not just from the Israeli bombs, which had left a trail of destruction in their wake, but from the fires of humiliation and rage that now burned in the hearts of its people. The streets were filled with angry protesters, their voices a cacophony of demands for retribution. The collective fury was palpable, a force that could not be easily contained. The attack, a deep wound to its pride, demanded a response. Iran's leaders, gathered in urgent meetings, knew that their next move would be scrutinized by the world. But what kind of response? The options were fraught with peril, each carrying the risk of escalating the conflict to uncontrollable levels. Iran's leaders faced a choice, each option more perilous than the last. The weight of their decision was immense, with the potential to alter the course of history. Full-scale retaliation, unleashing the full fury of its military might, was tempting. The show of strength could serve as a deterrent, but it also risked drawing the entire region into a devastating war. Missiles rained down on Israeli cities, a stark reminder of the destructive power at Iran's disposal. The night sky lit up with explosions, each one a potential spark for a larger conflagration. Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, launched rockets across the border. The conflict was no longer confined to two nations, it was spreading, threatening to engulf the entire region. The Gulf states, long wary of Iranian ambitions, braced for the worst. Their military forces were on high alert, ready to respond to any escalation. The world held its breath, praying for restraint that seemed increasingly unlikely. Global leaders convened in emergency sessions, their faces etched with concern. A more measured response, a calibrated show of force designed to deter further Israeli aggression without triggering a wider conflagration, was also a possibility. This approach required careful calculation and nerves of steel. But could the Ayatollahs, their faces etched with fury, stomach such restraint? The pressure to act decisively was immense, both from within and outside the country. Could they resist the clamor for vengeance from a population taught to hate Israel and its allies? The streets were filled with chants for retribution, a powerful force that could not be ignored. The world watched, its fate hanging in the balance. Every move was analyzed, every statement dissected as people everywhere hoped for a resolution that would avoid further bloodshed. Would cooler heads prevail, or would the flames of conflict engulf the region and beyond? The answer lay in the hands of a few, their decisions poised to shape the future of millions. The Middle East, a region long accustomed to conflict, felt the tremors of the Israeli attack like never before. Old wounds reopened, ancient rivalries flared, the echoes of past wars reverberated through the streets, and the air was thick with tension. Families huddled in their homes, fearing the worst, as the region braced for what was to come. The attack was not just a military strike, it was a spark in a powder keg, threatening to ignite a conflagration that could engulf the entire region. The attack on Iran had ignited the region's tinderbox, and the flames threatened to spread. The streets of Tehran were filled with smoke and chaos, as emergency services struggled to contain the damage. The international community watched with bated breath, knowing that the repercussions of this attack would be felt far beyond Iran's borders. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East was shifting, and the world was on edge. In Syria, the fragile peace held hostage by competing factions and foreign powers threatened to unravel. The streets of Damascus were tense, with armed groups patrolling and civilians caught in the crossfire. The delicate balance of power in the region was tipping, and the specter of renewed conflict loomed large. The Syrian people, already weary from years of war, faced an uncertain future. Turkey, already at loggerheads with Kurdish forces in the north, saw an opportunity to advance its own interests. The Turkish military mobilized, and the border regions became flashpoints of tension. The Kurds, caught between larger powers, prepared for a potential escalation. The complex web of alliances and enmities in the region was becoming even more tangled. The Syrian regime, backed by Russia and Iran, watched with a mixture of apprehension and opportunity. The corridors of power in Damascus buzzed with strategic discussions as leaders weighed their options. The presence of Russian and Iranian military advisors added another layer of complexity to the situation. The regime's next moves could have far-reaching consequences for the entire region. In Yemen, the Houthis, emboldened by Iranian support, stepped up their attacks on Saudi Arabia. The border regions saw increased skirmishes, and the conflict showed no signs of abating. The humanitarian situation in Yemen, already dire, worsened as the fighting intensified. The Houthis' actions were a clear signal that they were not backing down, and the Saudi response was swift and forceful. The Saudis, already bogged down in a costly and protracted war, found themselves facing a two-front conflict. The strain on their military and resources was immense, and the domestic pressure was mounting. The Saudi leadership faced tough decisions as they navigated the complexities of regional politics and military strategy. The war in Yemen had become a quagmire with no easy way out. The humanitarian crisis, already catastrophic, threatened to spiral out of control. Refugee camps swelled with new arrivals, and aid organizations struggled to meet the growing needs. The human cost of the conflict was staggering, with countless lives disrupted and futures uncertain. The international community called for urgent action, but the scale of the crisis was overwhelming. And in Gaza, Hamas, watching the unfolding chaos with a predatory eye, tested the waters. The streets of Gaza were tense, with sporadic clashes and a palpable sense of unease. Hamas's leadership saw the regional turmoil as an opportunity to assert their influence and challenge their adversaries. The situation in Gaza was a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Rockets arced towards Israeli settlements, drawing swift and deadly retaliation. The cycle of violence escalated rapidly, with each side responding with increasing force. The skies over the region were filled with the sounds of conflict, and the civilian population bore the brunt of the violence. The prospect of a broader war loomed large as the situation spiraled out of control. The cycle of violence, a grim echo of past conflicts, threatened to drag the region further into the abyss. The memories of previous wars were still fresh, and the scars ran deep. The people of the Middle East, caught in the crossfire of geopolitical struggles, faced an uncertain and perilous future. The world watched, hoping for peace but bracing for the worst. The world watched, a mixture of horror and helplessness etched on its face. The conflict, once confined to the volatile Middle East, now cast a long shadow across the globe. The interconnectedness of the 21st century meant that the shockwaves of war would be felt far beyond the epicenter. Oil prices, those barometers of global anxiety, skyrocketed. Traders, their nerves frayed, watched the news feeds with the intensity of hawks. The global economy, already grappling with a myriad of challenges, braced for impact. The specter of recession loomed large. The United Nations, that bastion of hope in a world teetering on the brink, seemed paralyzed. The Security Council, riven by divisions among its permanent members, proved incapable of decisive action. Condemnations rang hollow in the face of escalating violence, and in capitals across the globe, leaders scrambled to respond. Alliances were tested, loyalties were questioned. The world held its breath, praying for a diplomatic miracle that seemed increasingly elusive. In the race for diplomacy, tensions are high and stakes even higher. World leaders are scrambling to find a peaceful resolution, but time is running out. Every move, every word could tip the scales. As negotiations unfold, the hope for a diplomatic solution hangs by a thread. Will cooler heads prevail, or are we on the brink of an unavoidable conflict? Only time will tell. Iran's nuclear ambitions have long been a point of contention on the global stage. The potential for nuclear capability raises concerns not just for the Middle East, but for the entire world. The international community remains divided on how best to address this issue, with some advocating for diplomacy and others pushing for more stringent measures. The Middle East is a complex web of alliances and proxy wars, with many countries vying for influence. Iran's role in supporting various groups across the region has only heightened tensions. From Yemen to Syria, these proxy conflicts have far-reaching implications, drawing in global powers and complicating the path to peace. The future is fraught with uncertainty. The potential for escalation remains high, and the consequences of a full-scale conflict are almost unimaginable. Yet, amidst this uncertainty, there is still hope. Diplomatic efforts continue, and many believe that a peaceful resolution is still within reach. In these precarious times, the urgency of dialogue cannot be overstated. Open channels of communication are essential to de-escalate tensions and find common ground. It is only through continued dialogue and mutual understanding that we can hope to avoid the devastating consequences of war.